Hello, fourth grade science friends. We're here today for our last new science lesson of the year. Although I'm sad that this will be the last time we meet to discuss some new science information, I'm really proud of all the hard work that you did this year, and I know you'll keep it up in this last lesson as well. Today we're going to complete a lesson called Think Like a Scientist, and we're going to identify evidence. Okay, so in this we're going to be looking for evidence to support what this page is about. And I'll give you a sneak preview. It's about the Grand Canyon. So let's read. The Grand Canyon is an awesome wonder. Standing on its south rim, you can see its plateaus and canyons spreading northward on for about 29 kilometers, which is the same as 18 miles. In some places, you can see the Colorado River at the bottom of the canyon, about 1,500 meters, or 5,000 feet, below. Means if you're at the top of the canyon, it'd be about 5,000 feet down to the bottom where you would be able to see the Colorado River. The walls of the canyon are made up of horizontal layers of sedimentary rock. If you know what to look for, these layers reveal the history of the region. This is not the history of hundreds or thousands of years, but the history of how the landscape has changed over hundreds of millions of years. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. We're going to identify the evidence of how this region has changed over hundreds of millions of years. In this picture right here, it says the Colorado River carved the deep canyon over millions of years, exposing layer after layer of rock. So remember, at one point, this was all one piece connected. But through time and through weathering and erosion, it has chipped away at this to create what we now know as the Grand Canyon. The different colored layers in the walls of the Grand Canyon contain different types of rocks. The oldest layers are at the bottom. The newest layers are at the top. Okay, let's go to the next page and see what we have there. Now this is a really interesting diagram, but let's read before we look at the diagram. Limestone, sandstone, and shale are all sedimentary rocks. Look at the patterns in the rock formations for evidence of how the landscape in this region has changed over time. Then cite evidence from the diagram to answer the questions. Okay, so when we're done, of course, we'll have some fill in the blanks, we'll have time to climb, and we'll have it open-ended, so you'll use the information that we have learned on this page to help you answer those questions. Since on the last page, it told us that the oldest layers are at the bottom and the newest layers are at the top, I'm going to go ahead and start at the bottom. Now, obviously, this is not an exact picture of the Grand Canyon, but it is a diagram of the layers of the Grand Canyon. At the bottom, we have something called schist. This layer was once made of sedimentary rock. Forces inside Earth squeezed the rock until it changed into a fine-grained metamorphic rock called schist. So at one point, this was just layers of sediment. However, the forces inside Earth, like gravity, and the other sedimentary layers being put on top of it, have actually pushed it together so much that it's no longer considered a sedimentary rock. It's actually now a metamorphic rock. This next layer is a little smaller. It's a little bit lighter of a gray. We had dark gray, now we have a little bit lighter gray. And this layer is sandstone. This layer formed in an ancient sea where trilobites and brachiopods lived. There are traces of waves in the sands. So what that tells us is that at some point in the millions of years that it took for the Colorado River to carve out the Grand Canyon, at one point, that area was underground. Let's go to the dark gray layer. This is where we have something called shale. This layer was formed when the land was covered by a warm, muddy sea. Animals such as trilobites, brachiopods, and crinoids lived here. Okay, and here's a fossil of a trilobite that could be found in this layer. Then we'll go to some of the brown layers. The darkest brown is red wall limestone. These rocks formed in a wide, shallow sea. Sea animals such as corals and crinoids lived in the calm waters. The lighter brown is sandstone. This layer formed when a desert with sand dunes covered the land. The tracks of spiders and scorpions were preserved in the sandstone. So actually, if you were in here carving this out, you'd be able to see tracks of things like spiders and scorpions actually in the parts of the rock. And you might even find fossils of those as well. And our last layer that we'll talk about is way at the top, so this would be the newest layer, and that's called limestone. This layer formed when the region was covered with a warm, shallow sea. Sponges, snails, corals, sharks, and fish lived in the clear water. The fossil shell was found in the limestone, and this is a fossil of a gastropod. Okay? So really interesting information. Okay, remember, at one point, there was nothing there, millions of years ago. And then through weathering and erosion, these layers of rock built up. And then after they built up, more weathering and erosion came in the form of the Colorado River that chipped away at all the sides until we have what we see today. So that's pretty interesting when you think about it. So let's go over some important points. Okay. Number one, the Colorado River is what carved out what we now know as the Grand Canyon. This happened over a long period of time, millions of years. The oldest layers of rock are found at the bottom. The newest layers of rock are found at the top. The layers of the Grand Canyon are made up of sedimentary rock, and these layers show how the landscape of this area has changed over time. And finally, when observing the layers of the rock and the fossils that can be found in them, it was discovered that this area of land used to be covered by a sea. So those are really interesting facts about the Grand Canyon. After you finish your fill in the blanks, your time to climb, and your open-ended questions, don't forget to check out the Elaborate, where you'll watch a video about the Grand Canyon and then kind of maybe report on some facts that you have seen. It has been my pleasure working with you for science this year. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Can't wait to see how you guys do on this lesson, and I look forward to seeing you again for social studies in the future.